the more there is going on, the more a text can be read and reread in ways which make it an artistic text. But the one element I want to draw out from the opening here is Hitchcock's implicit claims for the power of cinema as a means of communicating with or talking to the public, as he shows how the news of the murder spreads. And a lot of this first sequence is made up of a kind of parallel montage, basically, which shows you the witness to the murder telling the police about what she saw, the man with the scarf around his face, who is the avenger, and in parallel to that, how that information is spread amongst the public through, for instance, this important close-up, which draws attention to the physical means of mass communication, the Exchange Telegraph Company Limited, and the kind of typewriter stroke press release machine, which is the height of modern technology at the time. But implicitly, by showing the spread of news in this ultra-modern form, he's also showing how the cinema trumps that through depicting this in greater detail and in its abilities to go back and forth between the original account and the news story which is made. What I'm suggesting here is that there's a documentary element here as Hitchcock explores what Grierson, Vertov, and others said was the tremendous ability of the cinema to show you the real in a way which you couldn't, as a single person, piece together. So you couldn't be in the same room as the reporter in the phone box and the editor in the newsroom and the printer and so on and so forth, and communicating to the public. Film has the ability to give this omniscient view of what's going on in a society in and through the means of realistic representation. So, that's the main line here, is Hitchcock's full awareness of the, as it were, documentary possibilities of cinema, the way cinema can show you the workings of society and here the workings of news. Of course, at the same time, and what makes this a complex text, is there's so much else going on. In particular, I'm sure you will have noticed the kind of rather Hitchcock look-alike play of a little guy at the tea stand or tea stall, food stall, where the woman is being interviewed by the police but surrounded by a group of anxious citizens. There's a young man, rather rotund, who, as she explains that the Avenger masked the lower half of his face, he pulls up his coat to cover half of his face. He's standing behind the woman, and then you have a very interesting shot where she sees him rather obscurely in some reflective surface, maybe it's the tea urn, I'm not quite sure what it is, of the tea stand, and kind of screams as he looks like the murderer. In this little play, Hitchcock, and this is the kind of artistic side of him, the thing to play with film, to do things, is he's in a sense pointing out to the audience that in telling the story, he's trying to terrify them a little bit, like the little Hitchcock lookalike guy is doing to the woman telling the story, re repeating the story, acting it out, giving both humor and terror to the audience. Actually, that's a thought that just occurred to me on viewing the sequence again. Um, but it points to, even within this sequence, which I chose originally just to show the realist element, Hitchcock's desire to show the world in this documentary kind of way, how that is already involved in the fantasy and storytelling elements of what is going on. But let me kind of expand on that by watching a little more of the film as the news gets round to the actresses in the production of Golden Curls, which was a third element in the parallel montage. You'll have noticed that as the murder takes place, you have flashing lights saying tonight, golden curls tonight, which is the name of a show in which I think the lead Daisy is involved. Um, she has golden curls herself, and you'll see how that plays out as we go along. Yeah, you have this omniscient view. It's a topic really perfect, that you have this intertitle, documentary as a getting around the news and the typical Hitchcock humor of a newsboy glad that the murder has occurred, so it's ultra news headline. The radio is another form of communication, and the responses of a varied public. Now the heroine Daisy, with her real blonde hair, reading the newspaper in the evening. The ad for the show they're in. What I mean here now is, as we move to her, the use of the close-up and her looking in the mirror, reflecting on herself, indicating an act of thinking and self-reflection. You enter her subjectivity. That's what the film is now doing. It's moved from the first sequence, or the news story sequence, which could have been from a documentary film. In a sense, that's all I'm saying. You're now moving into the fictional film, which is fictional, interestingly, in getting you, the spectator, to identify with, to read the expressions on her face, to try and get her inner life from watching the film. See, her dark-haired friend is not very concerned, tries to make a joke of it. One dark-haired, three blonde. And then in a repetition of the scene with the witness, where somebody pretends to be the murderer, you have the same thing playing out again, as somebody in the changing room also now imitates the murderer, bringing laughter, but laughter and fear together. And then that is in close up the character of Daisy, who is going to be the both the romantic and the threatened center of the story. Unfortunately, our time is more or less up, but I hope from you've been able to see that sequence reasonably well, that you've been able to hear my voice talking over the sequence, and perhaps we can even now discuss either a little bit of the sequence or the film or anything I've said this morning, and I can open up to some discussion now. Thank you very much. So, are there any comments or questions from anybody? Lorato, can I just check that everybody's able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
And were people able to see the film?
I was able to see the film from my side.
You were able to see?
Yes, Adam has a hand.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, hi John. Thank you very much. It was great. I couldn't actually. The clips were a bit problematic. They were jumping, and I couldn't hear you talking over them. But that's something that maybe could be a bit more resolved in future. But I loved what you said about technology, and I just wondered, it's such an elaborately prepared film. I think when you were talking about Hitchcock saying that he imagined it all in his head before he began, but that actually that's not really often the case. And I think probably with films it really is the case, that he couldn't improvise, that everything did have to be planned in advance. There was a budget and so on. So it is quite a constricting medium in a way, in comparison to, say, Joyce, who you spoke about last week. You know, he's writing Ulysses, he can constantly change it as he goes along. It's much less the case with the film, because of all the constraints of the budget and so on. So that was just one point I wanted to ask or make, really. The other thing about the use of the news in The Lodger is so extraordinary as well. It struck me in the way that it becomes a structural element in the film. It's not, I think beginnings are always amazing in Hitchcock, and this is an incredible one, starting with the woman's face screaming. But the news itself, you know, the newsboys and the new editions crop up. They proliferate throughout the film. They punctuate the film, and at the end, Novello is sort of saved by the news, if you like, isn't it? The news becomes a sort of active element in the story. I thought that was really interesting. I wonder what you had to say about it.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. I think is one of the signs of the authorship and artistry of the film is the recurrence of motifs. You know, so that although, you know, I only wanted to talk a bit about that opening press sequence. Yes, indeed, the end of the film, as you say, also relies on the news to bring it to a successful end, as the real murderer is discovered. News of that gets out and stops the mob from killing the fake avenger, the Ivor Novello character. So that's where, and then with that, you know, it's when you have that repetition of motif that you then, as a reader or interpreter, are prompted to ask slightly larger questions, which take you then into the realm of interpreting the film, that is, adding more meaning to the film through the sorts of questions which you ask. You know, and that can go quite deep, I think. And, you know, it has gone quite deep in, you know, many. I mean, Hitchcock is one of the most written about filmmakers, and it's probably a topic somewhere in that. But what occurs to me here is the ways in which the film really does play upon the reputation of Ivor Novello as a leading man, as it, you know, as I mentioned and as we talked about previously, as a leading man who would usually be the hero, but here he's shown to, in a sense, to be the villain. And isn't that, in a sense, doing a very Shakespearean thing of questioning appearances? And of course, watching the film and the press in the era of Trump and the fake news makes you realize that perhaps one dynamic of the film, and something which recurs very much in many of Hitchcock's films, is that appearances in the press can be deceiving, you know, and that can be a plot motif of the suspense film where the ordinary person is mistaken as a killer. It, of course, occurs in the 39 Steps, which unfortunately we didn't have time to talk about today, who's portrayed in the press as the murderer when in fact he isn't. It happens famously in North by Northwest with Cary Grant in that role. And it's a part of Hitchcock's play with the you know, the Shakespearean theatrical motif of seeing shouldn't be believing, or should it? And you know, the dynamic of the whole film of The Lodger is about, well, he seems to be the murderer? Is he the murderer? So actually, that press motif, which, as you say, structurally recurs, when you begin to probe it, it can take you deeper and deeper into understanding the dynamics of the film, the ways in which it gets your interest and maintains your interest, and make it, as I think you can see from even just looking at that first sequence, and it really is an artistic film in which everything is planned. And then to go back to your first point, I think what I meant when I said not everything was planned, what I meant was, of course he had a quite detailed plan, but as it went on, he might think of some new ideas and make it even more detailed, if you see what I mean. So some of it's sort of not made up on the spot, but made up during the filmmaking. It's not all there before the making of the film. The making of the film allows for some further ideas. So that in Psycho, for instance, most famously with the shower sequence, I can't remember the original plan. It was probably that she would be killed in the shower, but the actual detail of the filming it was developed, in the film with the help of Saul Bass. So the idea was there, but it's kind of filled in and developed and changed as the filming goes on. That's really what I meant in that regard. Yeah, but as I say, I apologize for not getting to the 39 steps, but and then we have to try and sort out this problem, because I really want to be able for you to see some sequences, and for you to hear me discussing them in a sense with you as we go on, so that maybe in our conversations you can people can reply in relation to the sequences which we see. But whether this medium of instruction is flexible enough to really do that, we'll have to see. I'm going to talk with the technician